Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with another deck tech for you to play. And in this case we're going to be playing a budget version of Lifegain in Historic. Now we've played again earlier this year a Mono White Ascend deck, which was literally just only commons and uncommons, but we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to be actually utilizing some rares, only 8 rares total in this deck to be precise, but there's a major reason why. A couple of cards that we just gained over the summer from the Jumpstart Historic Horizons, from Abiding Grace from that set, and Voice of the Blessed that just came out from Crimson Vow are the main reasons why I actually want to look at Mono White Lifegain again. But before we explain how that is, here's how basically we do this. First off, we'll go over the creatures in the deck. We'll then cover the non-creature spells, we'll cover the land base, we will cover the sideboard itself, have a couple matchups with Sparky to show you exactly how the deck is run, and if you are a fan of this stuff, and if you enjoy my content, and if you really want to support me, stick around to the end of the video to show you how you can upgrade this deck if you like it into something even more amazing. But before we get into any of that stuff, let's go ahead and dive right in, starting with the creatures. Now to begin, we're going to be utilizing 28 creatures in the deck, and we're going to be going over all of them in just a second, but we're going to start actually from our biggest creature and our main payoff. A 2-mana, 2/2 Spirit Cleric, Voice of the Blessed from Crimson Vow. The whole reason why we're even doing this deck. As you can see, whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. As long as the creature has 4 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it gains Flying and Vigilance. And as long as you have 10 or more counters on it, it has Indestructible. So we're trying to get as many counters on this thing as quickly as possible by triggering off that life gain ability. In order to do that, we'll be utilizing the remaining 24 creatures. All are 1-drops, and they will be synergizing very well with Voice of the Blessed in just a second with our non-creature spells, which we'll cover. But before we get to that, let's explain, of course, how we're going to get those counters on. Main card, of course, Soul Warden. You've seen it before. Card comes onto the battlefield, and every time a creature comes on, whether it's ours or an opponent's, you gain 1 life. This will quickly trigger off on turn 2, Soul Warden into Voice of the Blessed, and then this thing will snowball very quickly. Basically, if you can just get this down and your opponent can't deal with it, they're going to have a hard time dealing with the Voice of the Blessed as it keeps gaining more counters. But to ensure that the Soul Warden survives, we need to make sure we protect it. So we have Selfless Savior as a means to ensure that we can give it temporary indestructibility in order us to make sure we keep it alive, make sure that we can get those counters on the Voice of the Blessed. To round out the package, we'll need also a little bit of life gain, and just in case that the Soul Warden doesn't perform or somehow just gets blown up. Healer's Hawk, a really cheap spell. It's a flying bird, gives us lifelink, so it helps us gain life to give to the Voice of the Blessed more counters. We also are going to be utilizing our other remaining 4 rares in the deck as Speaker of the Heavens, which is also a plan B to the deck in case the Voice of the Blessed can't go big. We can also go slowly wide, but surely by making Angels as long as we have at least 7 life or more starting life total as in our deck, which obviously that just means 27 or more life, then we can start making Angels very slowly with this. But it is highly effective if you can keep that and the Soul Warden out. Also, as a bit of utility, we'll be having 3-bit Inspector, a 1-mana 1/2 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate. Basically, that means you make a clue token, which you can then pay 2 later on and sacrifice the artifact to draw a card. As you can see for our deck, we're white, so as you already know, the meme with white is we can't really draw cards very well. So the best way we're going to do that is put it on a creature, which we can then recur, sacrifice the creature as a chump blocker, keep making clue tokens, and then keep trying to draw little by little to help us make sure we maintain momentum. We don't really have too many other life gain payoffs, so we're going to try to fill it out a little bit with Leon and Vanguard. It's not really anything impressive, but as long as we can maintain at least 3 or more creatures on the battlefield at the beginning of combat, we can give it +1/+1, and it gains us 1 life. So think of it kind of like a slower Soul Warden, but it does work. And very slowly, but surely, with all of these out, Voice of the Blessed becomes quickly a powerful threat that our opponent will have almost an impossible time dealing with. But we'll still need a way to round out all of these creatures. So let's now cover the non-creature spells to show you how we can maintain all these 1-drops and why we're even playing them in the first place. Now, as far as the non-creature spells in the deck, we'll be utilizing 14 total, but as I mentioned before, each of them provide a very important utility. Starting with Cleric class, this is basically going to help us maintain our life. And as you can see, every time we would gain life, we add on an extra life. So we're basically gaining 2 life of, say, Soul Warden's trigger. At level 2, you can then gain life and then put a +1/+1 on a target creature you control. So if we are slowly having to grind out a game, you can then try to level this up a little bit, adding more counters to some of your creatures, or even put it on that Voice of the Blessed to make it powerful even faster. And not too often you're going to do it because, again, we don't run that many lands in this deck, but if we are having a hard time dealing with our opponent, we can then hit level 3. For 5 mana, when this class becomes level 3, you can return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you gain life equal to its toughness. What's sweet about that is we can utilize this ability to bring back the Voice of the Blessed to keep doing our thing, to ensure that we can also make sure our creatures can stay alive and slowly outgrind our opponent. But to make sure that this also can still work, we will also utilize cards such as Griffin Airy to help us also go wide, and also to provide additional support on top of the angels we can make with our Speaker of the Heavens. Griffin Airy, however, only triggers off if we gain 3 or more life in our turn, and then we can make a 2/2 white Griffin creature token with flying. So this is going to be what you want ideally out after you have your cleric classes running, plus maybe one of your life gain creatures such as that Soul Warden. With that, we can make sure we can get a ton of Griffins out, and it just keeps triggering off the process, making it very hard for our opponent to deal with them. Shelter is actually a very interesting card that I think is highly underrated currently in our meta, and this is actually a card that I really enjoy utilizing for this deck for a specific reason. As you say, it's a 2 mana instant speed that allows us to give our creature that we control protection from the color of our choice until end of turn, and we get to draw a card out of it. So what's sweet about this is, first off, draws a card in white, which is obviously something amazing, but the most important part about it is we get protection from the color of our choice. Now, keep in mind how this card works is actually really tricky, but if used correctly, can actually work in multiple ways. We can use this aggressively and then put it on our creature before combat, swing in, say like versus our mono red creature opponent, and then we basically can forcefully get through damage without having to worry about chump blocking from their side. On the other hand, you can also use this as a much more general use protection spell against removal, against something that you just can't deal with. The other way you can utilize this is a pseudo artifact enchantment removal. And what I mean by that is, say maybe one of your creatures has now gotten an enchantment on it, like a blue enchantment that prevents it from untapping. Now, if we play Shelter and then get protection from blue, that will bounce off the enchantment and allows us to free up our creature to swing again for damage. So remember, the way the card is worded, you get protection from the color of your choice. So just be mindful of, if you are trying to utilize this card, just be careful, say, if you have to call white. Not to say you can't, but that means then you kind of lock out your own self from trying to pump it or give it any other protection. Just as a fair warning. But this card has multiple uses. It's just really about how you time it and what you use it for. But don't underestimate Shelter. It's a great card. Finally, of course, the other main reason why we're doing this in the first place, Abiding Grace, 3 mana enchantment. And at the beginning of your end step, you basically get to either gain 1 life or return a creature card with a mana value of 1 from your graveyard to the battlefield. As you saw, we have 24 1-drops in this deck. Abiding Grace is definitely going to get something back very easily. And even if we aren't trying to bring anything back, gaining 1 life in this deck will help trigger off so many of our other abilities and will make sure that we can stay in this game. Abiding Grace is not to be underestimated, just like I mentioned with the Shelter. This is definitely a card that can help us grind out versus our opponent and ensure that we can just keep chump blocking to make sure that our opponent just can't beat us. But that's basically going to be it for the non-creature spells in the deck. We're now going to go over the land base real quick and then go over the sideboard. For your land base, real quick, we'll simple 18 lands total. We don't need any more than that. We have an extremely low mana curve, and also we're budget. I highly recommend stick with the plains. Get the 2 Shepherd Dunes, as you can see right here. If you need to go wide, you need to just crack it to pump out your entire team if you're going wide, but otherwise you really don't need anything else. And the only reason for that is, yes, it could be tempting to use some of the utility lands since you are a mono-color deck, but I recommend nothing against that. It's just you don't want any of your lands coming in tapped just to get maybe a gimmick such as an extra +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures. Keep it simple. This is all you need. For your sideboard here, we're going to be utilizing a little bit more jankier cards than we anticipate, but that's only because, well, we are running on a budget, so this is the best you can do with only 8 rares. If you want to invest more, again, and if you're a fan of my stuff, stick around to the very end of the video so I can show you how you can really push the upgrades in the deck. You won't be disappointed. But in any case, Chaplain of Elms, flipping into Chapel Shieldgeist is what you're going to want to use. This is going to be your budget Thalia. I'm not kidding on this. The ward ability is not much at 1, but it's still going to be annoying enough where your opponent probably doesn't want to pay it when they can't afford to. So when you flip this, you still get a flying 2/1 first strike creature, and first strike is actually not too bad, so sometimes they can actually punch above its weight. But again, it's a very slow version of it. You have to disturb it for 4 mana, so don't expect it to flip it immediately, but it is an option against those control players. Speaking of control players, you also have Deafening Silence, which is also a really sweet card to have. Yes, we do punish ourselves with this sometimes, but honestly, with the amount of creatures that we do play and with the non-creature spells that we do place down, it can still help us defeat our opponents that are trying to combo off, those opponents that are trying to go really spell heavy, because we want to allow ourselves to then grind out things with our creature package. Radiant Grace is basically a cheap version of Authority of the Consoles, but otherwise this card, when we can flip it, forces our opponent's creatures to come into play tapped, which buys us time, especially if they're trying to go big against us. Soul Guide Lantern, pretty easy. This is your graveyard hate, just 2 copies of. Sanctify is just your catch-all to destroy an artifact or enchantment, and the life gain is pretty relevant if we have Griffin Aerie on the battlefield, or at least our Voice of the Blessed. Banishing Light, just a couple copies of as our extra creature removal, or as our catch-all against planeswalker cards. And Make a Stand if our opponent is very wrath heavy. So if you're expecting a couple big wraths versus us, bring these in. Again, same thing, only 2 copies, 3 mana, and also you get a quick little amount of pump if we just need to force through a little extra damage. But that's basically going to be it for the sideboard. Alright, so enough of this. Let's go ahead and, as always, we'll fight Sparky to show you a little bit about how this deck is meant to be run. Okay, everybody, so as you can see in this example right here, we already have our 2 Soul Wardens out. We have a Cleric class, so this means we're going to be going off very quickly using our Voice of the Blessed. So we're going to play for that. Bring it in. This thing is going to now trigger off very quickly. Just watch. No attacks. If we know it predictably, we'll put down a creature. And there we go. And then you're going to see right now it's going to trigger off Voice of the Blessed to get even stronger. And there you go. Now it's flying as a 6/6. It's going to make it extremely hard for Sparky to get through. 7, 8. Alright, no swings now. We're basically right where we want to be. And then now we actually have 40 life. We're just going to trigger off completely here. Alright, and there you go. Your Voice of the Blessed now is already in range, where it is now a flying 12/12 with Vigilance and Indestructibility. Just go swinging with it, and that's all you need. So as you can see, alright, there's really nothing at this point Sparky can do. You can get down a couple Soul Wardens or the Cleric class, you are in business. There's nothing really your opponent's going to be able to do short of exiling the creature. So everything comes out, but at this point it's way too late. It is just too late. Sparky's got nowhere to go. They can swing if they want, but they're not going to. And you know what? Let's upgrade this to level 2, just because. We go swinging. Not much else. That's basically it, guys. So as you see right there, that's what you're just trying to do with it. The Voice of the Blessed. An upgraded Johnny's Primate that does an insane amount of damage. Extremely much more versatile than the former. And that's all I got for you guys. Let's actually go ahead and go to game 2 and show you what happens if you need to grind out the long game. Like what happens if something happens to your Voice of the Blessed. Sparky unfortunately has kind of stopped this whole game plan. However, we do have a backup plan now. So instead, we just want to start triggering off the Griffin Aeries. We're going to not attack because we don't want to go into the cloud here. Alright, there we go. Alright. So, as you can see right here from this whole idea, instead of the Voice of the Blessed being basically locked down, instead of going big, we can now go wide with the Griffin Aerie. Very slowly, but surely, we can still get a win out of this. We just are going to have to do it the slow, grindy way. Now that we actually have both Leonin Vanguards along with our Cleric class, now we can speed this up a lot faster and guarantee that we can get off a lot of life. This thing is so huge, but we can't use it. That stinks, but it's okay. We're going to have more than enough life to sponge everything that Sparky's going to throw at us, so no bother, no need to attack. Not too bad for a cheap little budget deck of just getting life gain like non-stop. Alright, so the other plan you have with this deck is if we can just get off with the Cleric class at least one more land and then start putting counters on things, then we can close out this game a lot faster, allowing us to then start swinging, because things with +1/+1 counters will just start getting bigger, and we won't have to rely completely on Voice of the Blessed. So as you can see, again, this deck is capable of doing all these things. It's just going to have to be a little careful with how you get there. But we have now so much life coming in. At this point, nothing really matters against Sparkies. Alright, well either way, there you go. That's how the deck runs. Slow version of it, you can grind it out. Trust me, even against non-Sparky opponents, you actually can pull this off. Now, before I begin, again, if you made it this far in the video, thanks so much for supporting me. I really do appreciate it. And for those of you that did stick around, here is the secrets to upgrade this deck and make it amazingly powerful. So if you are a fan of the Lifegain, the upgrades you want, for example, you'll be taking out a couple of Abiding Grace, which is a little hurtful to our deck, but you'll be pumping it instead with Heliod. Heliod is going to be an extremely helpful counterpart to this deck. It does a bunch of things. It helps ensure that our Voice of the Blessed will get more counters even faster. It helps, of course, with the lifelink that it can trigger onto any one of our creatures. And of course, it's indestructible itself. So once this thing comes online, if our devotion is bigger than 5, this god basically helps us create a second win con for our deck. In the 1-drop slot, you're going to get rid of your Hawks, and you're instead going to put in Serra Attendant. Serra Attendant is going to be for a 1/1 human monk, but again, if you can gain enough life, this thing becomes a flying 6/6 with lifelink, which is extremely powerful to have. I highly recommend get these in as soon as possible. Otherwise, your other upgrades are going to be, and again, this is a little bit of a controversial one, but I would recommend it. You might want to get rid of your Thraben Inspectors and put in 4 copies of Legion's Landing. Legion's Landing, legendary enchantment, and it creates vampire creature tokens with lifelink. The whole thing allows us also to forego not having to add in any lands or adjust anything. And to mention, it can create, once it's flipped for 3 mana and tapping it as the Adanto First Fort legendary land, a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So in other words, you're churning out more lifelink creatures to help trigger off your Soul Warden, to help trigger off the Voice of the Blessed. This is just going to help you ensure that even if your opponent keeps blowing up all your creatures or even exiling them, you have a backup plan to keep churning out tokens to keep yourself alive. That's mostly going to be it for the creatures, but as far as non-creature upgrades, I would recommend get rid of the Griffin Aerie and instead add in Dawn of Hope. Dawn of Hope kind of adds a little bit of redundancy in terms of making tokens with the Legion's Landing, and it's about the same. 4 mana, but you don't have to tap anything, versus the Legion's Landing, whereas you would pay 3 mana and you're tapping the land itself, so it's about the same price. But the real reason why you want to use Dawn of Hope is it's a much more consistent card draw spell. So as you see right here, for 2 mana as an enchantment, whenever you gain life, you can pay 2, and if you do, you get to draw a card. So this is going to help you be a little bit more consistent with your card draw. Yes, sometimes you may not be able to always pay the 2, but it's an awesome option also, and again, as I mentioned, the redundancy of making life-linking creature tokens is very relevant for our Voice of the Blessed. As far as the land base, again, because of how this deck runs, you really don't need to change anything land-wise. Just don't use any of the utility lands that give you colorless. That really doesn't help your deck all that much, and also you want to guarantee that you can get down Voice of the Blessed since it is double white. Take out one of the Shepherd Dunes and only keep in just the one if you need it. Not much else really to change there. As far as your sideboard, you probably already heard me mention this with the budget version, but add in now Thalia, and it helps slow down the control decks out there. Add in Authority of the Consuls. This also triggers off a lot of the life gain that we will gain, and also it punishes a lot of the elf and goblin decks that may still be running around in the historic format. And finally, I would recommend Skyclave Apparition. You could argue that the case can be made for something like a Conclave Tribunal, or you can even keep the Banishing Light. Really depends on your personal preference. But there's a couple reasons I would argue for Skyclave Apparition. Yes, you're a little bit more limited in the fact that it can only get anything with a mana value of 4 or less, and if it does get blown up, your opponent will then get back whatever you exiled and it becomes an illusion. However, the illusion would also trigger off the Soul Warden, so that can give you a couple more hits in terms of life, and also a couple more hits for your Voice of the Blessed. Also, the Skyclave Apparition, because it's a creature, can be brought back if you hit level 3 on your Cleric class. So just keep those things in mind for this. Again, your mileage may vary, and it really just depends on the meta. So as I always say, please make sure to adjust based upon whatever happens out there. And there you have it, everybody. That is Mono White Lifegain for 2021 in Historic. But you tell me, are you a fan of these type of decks? Do you enjoy having life gain where you can pump and then either go big or go wide? Let me know in the comments below, and I would love to hear from you. If you do want to see me do more of these budget deck techs, all you have to do is just leave a comment below. I'll be more than happy to reply to you, and I do appreciate that those of you that seek me out and do like to watch this kind of budget content, I really enjoy making these for you. Trust me, I know Arena can be very expensive, but as the reason why I'm motivated to do all this is to show you that you can definitely have some fun decks without having to spend a ton of money out there. But aside from that, thanks again for watching, everyone. Please make sure to give a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to see all the deck techs, pack openings, and more. It really does show that people do care about my content, and again, if you do want to see more stuff out there, just give me a heads up. You know where to find me on any one of my platforms, whether it's here or on any other social media. I'll be happy to chat with you. But until next time, just remember that no matter what you do crack open in a booster pack or play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!